Hey everyone. We're going to get started in just a few minutes as additional folks trickle in. But you're here, I assume, for the the Wastewater Needs Assessment Advisory Group meeting, the first of 2026. We have a full agenda as usual, and excited to jump in, especially to sort of more of the results portion of the project, as we're firmly in the second half of the project. But again, I want to wait just a minute or two to let everyone join who's planning to join. So we'll start officially in a minute. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. And welcome everyone again to the Wastewater Needs Assessment Advisory Group meeting, the first of 2026. And my name's Greg Pierce from UCLA, heading up the contracted portion of the needs assessment, which is sponsored and led by the State Water Resources Control Board, of course. But I'll be facilitating today's meeting. You may have noticed I'm not Ariana, as the advisory group members received notice. Sadly for us, Ariana has moved on to another position, but we have our full team here and we are carrying on the work and excited to share with you today. The first thing I'm going to do is actually turn the floor over to Danya Jemerson, who is leading the wastewater needs assessment effort on behalf of the State Water Board, who will be introducing our speakers to give opening remarks today. So Danya?
Thanks, Greg. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this is our advisory group meeting number 7. So it's very exciting times. So the Wastewater Needs Assessment Advisory Group, as you know, plays a very critical role in shaping all of this work. So we are very fortunate to be joined today by board member Nicole Morgan. Given the many demands of their time, her participation reflects that the board has a strong commitment to address wastewater treatment infrastructure needs and advancing the human right to sanitation. So her perspective is especially valuable as we approach key milestones in this project, including the completion of the inadequate systems and our continued advancement towards completing phase 2. So at this point, I would like to invite board member Morgan to share her thoughts on the collaborative efforts of this group and the path ahead for the wastewater needs assessment. Thank you.
Thank you, Danya, and thank you, everyone. It is an honor to be able to join you this morning. I want to thank you all for your time and continued engagement in supporting the wastewater needs assessment. The State Water Board is deeply grateful for the advisory group's valuable input and sustained participation. While the advisory group is not a decision-making body, your feedback plays a critical role in informing and shaping the wastewater needs assessment. Your comments are carefully considered as documents such as the inadequate systems list are routed for review. Given the scope and importance of this work, the State Water Board must coordinate closely with multiple agencies, including Cal EPA. As a result, review timelines may not be as ideal. We sincerely appreciate your flexibility, understanding, and thoughtful feedback despite these constraints, as it is meaningfully strengthens our overall effort. The release of the inadequate systems list represents another major milestone for the State Water Board's wastewater needs project. The purpose of developing this list and this associated criteria to support statewide planning and future decisions by identifying wastewater treatment systems that may need infrastructure improvements or regionalization support. This is a non-regulatory effort to identify and help prioritize funding needs and infrastructure solutions, highlight systems with operational compliance challenges based on available data, and support implementation of SB 1215 by improving the state's understanding of the capacity, condition, and needs of potential sewer service providers. The list is currently under review by regional water boards for facility inclusion and data competence, giving their knowledge in management of the permitted facility case files. They are the most knowledgeable of these facilities and the files and the records, just the data that the state board has received. So we really wanted to give them a chance to take a look at that list, review the data, and provide input. Later in the process, the list and methodology will be shared with the advisory group for input prior to the potential public release of which is anticipated mid-year. Consistent with the board members' direction, Wastewater Needs Assessment Project team and staff have coordinated early and closely and continuously with the wastewater community during the development of the inadequate and at-risk list. This has included multiple meetings with CASA and SWRCB to discuss concerns related to the list, the proposed terminology. In December, CASA and SWRCB submitted a formal memo outlining some comments. The State Water Board has received this memo and is carefully considering the feedback as the wastewater needs assessment continues. I thank you all for your time, your dedication. Many of you have submitted meaningful comments, written, verbally. Please continue to engage with us. This is how we are able to ensure a successful outcome of this effort. I want to thank you all. I apologize that I had to provide quick opening remarks. I want to make sure that everyone knows that this is deeply meaningful to the State Water Board and myself. We have the third day of an ongoing hearing for the Bay Delta today, so I am not going to be able to stay for the remaining of the meeting, but definitely we'll check back in with staff. As always, please reach out with any questions or additional comments. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Board Member Morgan, for taking the time and a very busy time, and for addressing the topics and the work that we'll be discussing today. So with that, we are going to go ahead and jump in to the core of today's presentations and discussions, which are on 3 topics, all of which are related. This is going to be, the presentations are going to be by various UCLA folks on the team today. But first, we're going to jump into the finalization of the inadequacy criteria, which will be led by Grace Harrison, who's been working very diligently on this front, really for over a year now, but looking forward to discussing the finalization of those criteria, including timelines. And again, there's more information about each of these topics in the executive summaries that we sent out prior to this meeting. Then similarly, but a little less far along, we'll talk about the process toward finalizing risk criteria for systems and facilities. And then the final topic we'll cover is around the identifying the spatial location and mapping of facilities and systems that are on the facilities list as part of the wastewater needs assessment, for its own sake, but also instrumentally identifying the spatial location so that we can use that information in the risk assessment as well as the solutions analysis. So that's the agenda for today. And we're going to go ahead and jump in to the inadequacy criteria. And to do that, I'm going to turn, sorry, I forgot the slide. In a minute, I'm going to turn it over to Grace to run through the inadequacy criteria. But first, here's a reminder of the timeline and where we're at. On our project timeline, again, the project runs through, our work, I should say, runs through June 2027. But here's where we are in terms of key tasks, or really the remaining tasks for the project in phase 2. So I'm not going to talk about each of these here. But just to note, again, that you'll have a further update on the unsewered analysis, kind of a final update in April. We're still in progress with the inadequacy net risk analysis, but moving toward final wrap-up of that by the fall. The solutions and cost analysis that flows from that has been ongoing, but will really ramp up, and you'll hear a lot more about that, especially starting in summer and throughout the rest of the project. Then we'll tackle affordability and funding analysis associated with inadequacy and solutions and costs, and also provide a roadmap for ongoing wastewater needs assessment efforts. But again, today we're going to focus on inadequacy, risk, and mapping and spatial analysis. So now I can turn it over to Grace to talk first about the inadequacy criteria, and we'll have a discussion, of course, around that. So Grace.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to reintroduce myself for those who maybe haven't joined us before. I'm Grace Harrison, and I'm a project manager at UCLA's Luskin Center for Innovation. And yeah, I've been primarily working on this project focused on the inadequacy and risk assessment, which is, we've really been working on for the last year. So we're excited today to come to you with some more finalized criteria and talk about the timeline for the review process of the inadequate facilities and systems lists, which you all will be helping us review. So that's what we're going to sort of start with. But I guess before I fully get into things, I just want to set expectations about where we've come from and where we're going. So as you've all participated in our advisory group meetings, you're probably somewhat familiar with the criteria. We talked about the inadequacy and risk criteria back in January of 2025 at that advisory group meeting, the April meeting, and the July meeting. I think we covered it in all three of those, which was great. And we received a lot of feedback, which we were able to incorporate. And we've also hosted monthly office hours during the months where we didn't have the advisory group meetings, which of course you all are always invited to attend. And we've received a lot of really helpful comments and collaboration during those hours. So thank you to those who show up and chat with us about this work. It's really, really beneficial. So again, extending the invite to those who maybe haven't had the chance to join us. But so that's where we're at right now. And we have pretty much collected as much feedback as we can for this current iteration of the inadequacy assessment for this first wastewater needs assessment. So we, of course, always welcome additional feedback on the criteria. We recognize that this is the first time we've done this and there's lessons to learn. But in order for us to move forward in the work, we kind of have to stop receiving feedback for this current iteration, but can consider it for the next wastewater needs assessment and things like that. We'll talk more about the risk assessment where it's a little bit more flexible with receiving feedback, but I'm specifically speaking about the inadequacy assessment at this point. And I just want to emphasize again that you all, as the advisory group members, will have an opportunity to review these lists prior to their finalization and potential publication. They'll be published internally, but potential public publication. And so, yeah, please, prepare for that. We'll talk about the timeline And we really value your feedback there. All right, so this is the timeline that we're working with. I apologize with all the dates, but there's a lot of stakeholders that are going to review these lists for good reason. So that's why there's so many bullet points. But I do want to announce that the first working drafts of the list have been shared with the regional water boards, as Board Member Morgan sort of alluded to. And this is really an exciting step for us. And we're really excited to see what the regional boards have to say about our work. I know I can speak for myself that they've been so extremely helpful in developing the inadequacy criteria. So we're excited to hear their comments. They'll have a 2-week review period, and then we will have 2 weeks to make changes as we see appropriate for our work. Then following their review, we'll have to notify Cali PA that we're planning to share the list with you all, the advisory group members. We're required to notify Cali PA, and we can't move forward with sharing the list with you all until that's been approved by Cali PA. So we really hope that they are able to quickly approve this process, but it's a little out of our hands. So this is an area where there could be a hang up in the timeline. And we'll of course communicate that with you all. But yeah, we really can't move forward until Cali PA approves of the list being shared with you all. So that's the situation. But if everything goes as we hope, we're aiming to share the working drafts with you all beginning of March, and then you would have a 2-week period to review the lists, share comments, review the data, things like that. And then we would have an additional 2 weeks to respond to those comments and make changes. So I would say, plan for that 2-week review period if you're going to want to take a close look. There is a lot of data, as you probably can assume. So just want to give you, a heads up that this is hopefully coming in March, and we'll of course keep you posted on that Cali PA approval timeline. And then after the advisory group, the list will go to executive management and the state water board members, and they'll take a close look. Again, we've got a 2-week review period there, followed by our review or our responses for 2 weeks. And then finally, we'll notify Cali PA that the lists are finalized, ready to go, and really, close the book on that work. So this is a long review process. We're hoping it goes smoothly. We're doing our very best to keep close time with these dates we've set here. But again, we ask for your flexibility and understanding as we move through this. Okay. Now, getting to the good stuff, the actual criteria, I want to remind us of our definition of inadequate that we're currently working with. I'll just read it off. So inadequate systems or facilities are a wastewater system or facility does not adequately treat and or dispose of wastewater, leading to environmental and or public health degradation. So that's still our working definition. Again, this is not a legal definition. And as Board Member Morgan mentioned, this terminology is in review with the State Water Board right now. There's been discussion between multiple stakeholders of alternative definitions or alternative terms being used. For now, we're sticking with inadequate as we move forward with our list in this presentation. But I do just want to note that it has an asterisk next to it a little bit. But yeah, so that's what we mean by inadequate when we're talking about inadequacy criteria. And you've probably seen this visual before, but it's an important one because it shows that we have really 3 different inadequacy assessments. And then we're doing at-risk assessments for each of these different facility and system types. So the NPDS inadequacy assessment is its own thing. The WDR inadequacy assessment is its own thing. And the collection systems inadequacy assessment is its own thing. And this means that they have different criteria, they have different analysis methods. So they really, they pretty much stand alone, which means that, yeah, we've done a lot of work trying to refine the unique criteria for each facility and system type. Sorry, next slide. Oh, I skipped ahead. Okay, I was trying to give you a primer that we're going to talk about the collection systems now. The collection systems I'm going to start with because their inadequacy criteria I think is the most complicated, or it has sort of the most components. So I've tried to put it into a diagram that I think helps, but I recognize that this diagram is maybe still slightly intimidating. So we can walk through it together. I'm going to start from the top. So these top boxes here. The red and the blue are both inadequacy metrics that are looking at spills. So when collection systems are having spills, we're looking at the volume of that spill, or we're considering the number of spills that a collection system is having. So the blue metric is looking at the spill volume of that for that system per the population served of the system. So trying to kind of, see the ratio of the size of the spill for the population that's served by the system. And I want to emphasize that these metrics have been scaled by the system's size or by the population served. So large systems are only being compared to other large systems. Small systems are being compared to small systems, things like that. So, we've tried to scale the systems so that we're not penalizing very tiny systems. So I can talk more about that if people have specific questions, but I'll keep it broad for now. So yeah, sticking with our blue metric here, spill volume per population served, we've calculated a 5-year rolling average of that number and a 12-month rolling average of that number. And then we've identified systems that are low performers in both of those average groups. And what we mean by low performers are systems that are in the top 25% of spill volume per population served. So these are systems that are having very large spills, or a spill with a large spill volume for their population served. So maybe they've had multiple large spills in a row, or they had really one significant spill. There's multiple different ways that you could kind of end up in this low performing system group. But ultimately they're in the top quarter of systems. And so if you are low performing in both of the 12-month and 5-year average, then you are considered inadequate. So that's one way. This metric is pretty much mirrored, like the methods are mirrored for the red boxes, where we're looking at spill count per system length. So the actual analysis process is the exact same, where we have the 5-year and 12-month averages, and we're identifying the low performers. But we're looking at spill counts rather than spill volume, and we're looking at system length rather than population served. And the spill length, we're excluding laterals, so it's just the main pipe. So these red and blue metrics are fully focused on spills. And like I said, it's a little complicated in how the methods are done, but I think at its core, we're trying to identify systems that are having consistent spills and that are having large spills. Or maybe they're having, both consistent and large spills. And obviously large is going to be dependent on the system size. And so that's why we've tried to scale everything the way we did. Okay, so that's the spill metrics. Now let's turn our focus to this bottom half of the diagram, and we're looking at reporting missing reports. So in the yellow box, this is referring to when systems are supposed to certify whether or not they've had any spills for the last month. And if the system has not had a spill, which is great, then they're supposed to, send in a report that is a no spill certification, that sort of certifies that no spills occurred, and then they do that every single month. So if a system is missing a no spill certification for more than 12 out of 12 months, so an entire year in the last year, but they haven't reported any spills for that same time period, then something has gone awry because they're not reporting spills, but they're also not certifying that they haven't had any spills. So we don't really know what the true situation is for this system. So that's one part of the reporting criteria. The other part is in this grayish blue box, and that is if the system is not present in the annual reports data set that's available on SWRCB. That's implying that the system has not submitted their required annual report in multiple years. And I say multiple because it's not just from like 2025 or 2024. I believe this data set goes back to mid 2023. And so if the system does not have an annual report present in this data set, then yeah, they are missing an annual report from multiple years at this point. So you take the yellow box, which is our no spill certifications, and you take the annual reports criteria. And if a system is missing both of these reporting requirements, then they are flagged as inadequate because these are both really important reports or types of reports. And to be missing both, we really just, at that point, we don't really know what's going on with the system. And it's very hard to evaluate their spills because we don't have data on the spills because the no spill certification issue. But something significant is going on with the reporting here. So that is the inadequacy criteria for sanitary sewer systems. I have a section for questions at the very end, but I'm going to pause here just because that's a ton of information. The other ones are simpler. But yeah, if folks have questions, feel free to raise your hand or send it in the chat. Debbie.
Yeah, just to clarify, Grace, you said that the spills, the laterals weren't included on length, but I wanted also to find out the laterals also, any spill laterals not included in the count too, right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Sharon.
Yeah, I was just wondering, you don't by any chance have like a hypothetical example to compare the spill volume per population served versus the spill count per system length, do you? I'm just really curious how that plays out, and I can't quite picture it in my mind without sort of getting walked through an example. It might be something, if you don't have it handy, that if you could like a one pager that kind of walks through what that would look like, it might help people understand the use of both metrics in this approach.
Yeah, that's a good question. The reason we decided to include both metrics was the data sort of leans towards certain types of systems. Let me describe this better. So spill volume per population served, you end up, there seems to be a larger number of what am I trying to say? The distribution of systems seems to lean a little bit more towards the small systems, whereas on spill count and system length, it leans a little more towards the larger systems. And so we didn't want to disproportionately identify one type of system over the other. And so by using both, it balances out a little bit more. I would say both metrics are pretty balanced. Like we're not identifying only small systems or only large systems. It's really a pretty minimal in the data, but that's the reason they're both included is you just kind of the data ends up identifying slightly different types of systems.
Okay, thanks.
And let's see, are the 5 and 12-month averages weighted differently? No, they are weighted the same. And are you looking at how the data is trending to identify deteriorating systems? This is looking over, well, I guess that's the idea of the 5-year rolling average, is to see how they're performing over a long amount of time. But trends, no, we're not looking at specifically like a trend over time analysis. But that was the goal of trying to include the 5-year rolling average, was to consider how the system has performed over, a longer amount of time. Todd, yeah.
Thanks, Grace. I was curious in learning if there was a way that this inadequacy criteria was capturing systems that have been improved over the last 5 years, too.
The goal of then having the 12-month rolling average was to try to balance it so that if the system hasn't been or has been performing well in the last 12 months, then they wouldn't be a low performer in that category and hopefully wouldn't be flagged as inadequate. That's the thought process there.
That's something, I mean, this is a first time effort, so that's something that certainly with this baseline we could track more easily over time, and speaks to the importance of updating certainly the lists in as dynamic a way as is possible for the capacity of the team that will be leading this effort going forward.
Yeah, it's complicated. There's so many different ways we can cut the data. So all this feedback is really useful. Jared?
Hi, good morning. Todd raises a really good point about progress. I think the rolling average about a decade ago was 4, and now it's close to 1. And so just that lowering of the mean makes a big difference in terms of how you evaluate and where you draw the line for what you're currently calling inadequate. And we have a request out there to kind of change that term just because it might be stigmatizing. But wanting to note that Todd's comment's really spot on with that lowering of the spill count and that progress people have made. It's all really a function of a very mature regulatory regime that the Water Board runs with the collection systems.
All right. Any last questions here? We also, there's more time for questions at the end if people digest this and have thoughts. I'm going to move forward though to our NPDES criteria. So this I hope is a little simpler. We'll see. The NPDES criteria centers around an EPA designation, which is, they call facilities they say is a facility in significant non-compliance. And in past advisory group meetings, we've talked about what that definition of significant non-compliance is for EPA. In short, it's made up of effluent violations, monitoring and reporting violations, and they look at both sort of chronic violations and more acute timely violations. So I'm not going to go through like what that EPA criteria is made up of. But if you are interested, it's in federal code. You can read more about it or go back and look at some of our past presentations. But our criteria builds off of the significant non-compliance designation, and it identifies facilities that, one, if the facility has an active SNC streak, and what we're defining as a streak is if the facility was identified as SNC 2 or more quarters in a row. So maybe they were SNC in, Q4 of 2025 and Q3 of that year. That would be considered a streak, but I've also seen facilities who are insignificant non-compliance for like up to 20 quarters in a row. So it really can vary. But that's one way, is if they are in an active streak. The other way is maybe they're not in an active streak, but they were identified as being insignificant non-compliance this last quarter, so Q4 2025. And they've also been identified as insignificant non-compliance at least once before in the last 5 years. So now this is sort of becoming another becoming a reoccurrence in the last 5 years. And you might think that this red one would happen more often, but this is pretty uncommon. The vast majority of facilities that we're seeing added to our inadequacy list are because they are in an active SNC streak. So this blue box is, I would say, the more important, or not more important, but it occurs more often. Just for some context there. So yeah, that's the crux of the inadequacy criteria for the NPDES facilities. It seems pretty simple here, but there's a lot going on sort of behind the scenes with the EPA data of how they identify or how they define significant noncompliance. And I'll say again, or I'll say for the first time, not again, that the great staff at the State Water Board, they have a close hand in sort of working with EPA to make sure that the facilities that are being flagged as significant noncompliance aren't incorrectly being done. So that's why we feel pretty confident about using this data. So those are the details for the NPDES facilities. Does anyone have questions on this? Debbie.
Yeah, Grace, thanks. And thank you for working, kind of helping me continue to try to understand how the list and through EPA was on this. One of the questions that I have seen with the data, and I just wasn't able to parse out, a lot of the significant incompliance, or they have a number of them, are because of a certain report, and so you'll have three violations for the same water quality test. Let's say it was missed, and then it keeps on going and going and going because it's not necessarily that they could go back in time. And so is that something, or there was a reason why it didn't happen, i.e. they were changing treatment plants, it was different, they were delaying. Is that it being looked at, are you seeing that too, or does your data dive to that? Or is that something that we'll have to look at when we look at the list?
So my understanding is that once the facility, if the facility is submitting something late, that's flagged differently than if the report is completely missing. So whether it's like a deficient report or a missing report, those are two different categories. I don't remember off the top of my head exactly how the data is organized, but I do know that those two things are distinguished, and we're primarily looking at if the report is fully missing. I think what you're saying is, would that facility then be flagged as in non-compliance for multiple quarters in a row? I don't believe so, but I would have to confirm what the situation is on that. I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, so let me just clarify this a little bit more, so it's more, it's not that, what I'm not trying to say is, they didn't go necessarily out and go monitoring, but for some reason they took a sample, it wasn't one that you could repeat because you have another one that's right after that, right? And that sample might be expressed three ways in a permit. Two or three ways in a permit, whether it's as a loading rate, as a concentration rate, as a weekly rate, as a monthly rate, those kind of things. There's different ways that it might be expressed. And so what I just wanted, so that it's clear, maybe we can go after this a little bit, but what it will show is that will be like, even though they might have done everything but that one constituent, it will continue to show as two or three violations month after month after month. And so, or week after week after week. And it just doesn't go away. And that's where I saw some that were like, 80 some odd, their streaks were super high. And that was the part that I was curious. I was trying to see if that had been looked into.
Yeah, Maureen, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was going to say we're Debbie on the from the solutions perspective, we are just starting to dig in and to look for those types of scenarios and provide UCLA feedback on it. So we're looking at it. I'm hoping that water board and regional board folks will be looking at those different scenarios too. So yeah, spot on, good question, and more to come.
Thanks, Maureen.
Yeah, and I think if I mean, I would have to take a closer look. So I think if Maureen has an example of a facility, or Debbie, if you have an example of a facility where maybe that's the case, it would be really helpful to, yeah, be able to sort of pull the specific data that might be causing that, because there's just a lot of data. It's hard to know where to look. But yeah, definitely open to figuring out if that's something our analysis is overlooking currently, or yeah, not considering. Okay. And then I did see a question from Steve about unsewered areas. We're going to be talking about unsewered areas next advisory group meeting. But I will just say here, there is a whole other part of this project that is focused on unsewered areas, but the inadequacy assessment is only focused on the 3 system and facility types that we're talking about here. So just as a aside. Okay, so we're going to move forward to the WDR criteria. And before we go through this, I want to just bring everyone's attention to the advisory group summaries, or the executive summaries that were sent out, because the slides currently, they don't have all the details of the WDR criteria, because there's a lot of different violation types that are included in this analysis. And so it doesn't really make sense to lay them all out in a PowerPoint form. But I encourage everyone to look at those summaries, because it has the complete tables of the violation types that hopefully would be helpful to you all. So the slides as they stand just contain examples of each of these different types of violations. The WDR inadequacy criteria is made up of a selected effluent violation types, if the facility has an active enforcement order, and if they have a select monitoring and reporting violations. So the reason I say percent exceedance next to the effluent violations is we're looking at what percent in exceedance of their permit limit is this facility for that constituent. For the active enforcement orders, we're looking at the number of enforcement orders. In most cases, this would be 1, maybe 2. And then for monitoring and reporting violations, again, this is a count, because it's a number of violations that the system, or that the facility has. And I put this note here that for these facilities, we're looking at facilities within the top 25% of their violation scores. So these are facilities that are having the largest number of monitoring and reporting violations, or the most significant monitoring and reporting violations. So a facility isn't flagged as inadequate for just having 1 M&R violation. It would be sort of a mix of multiple types, or a large number of 1 type. But we'll go into details a little bit, small details. Okay, so this slide is focused on effluent violations and active enforcement orders. I've included these 3 types of constituents, or nitrogen and nitrates have a lot of different, they show up in different ways through monitoring, but generally these 3 types of different constituents. And I've selected these because they all have a different threshold, permit limit exceedance threshold, which was recommended to us by water board staff because of the varying significance of each contaminant. So for nitrogen, this is a significant violation type. If a facility is exceeding their permit limit by 20% or more, and in any 2-month period, or 2 months in a 6-month period within the last 5 years, that's a confusing way of saying, are they having multiple violation exceedances in a limited period over the last 5 years? Then that facility is flagged as inadequate. Whereas for BOD, that threshold is a little bit larger, so you could have a 40% exceedance, and for oil and grease, that threshold is even higher at 60%. And again, these thresholds were recommended to us by staff, and so they've determined which contaminants they thought should be sort of ranked, or not ranked, but should have a tighter threshold. And then an example of the enforcement order types would be NOVs. I included NOVs because this is the only enforcement order where it is 2 or more. For the other enforcement order types that are included in the WDR criteria, the facility would only need to have 1 of those to be considered inadequate. But for NOVs, we're looking at 2 or more NOVs over the last 5 years. Okay, let me pause here for the effluent and EOs. Any questions? Sharon?
Yeah, I think you might have said it and I missed it, but I just wanted to confirm. Are each of these sort of independently looked at, or is there some kind, like, with all of these, I'm not quite sure where the cutoffs are. That was mentioned in the context, I think, of the collection system one, but it's like, you're kind of leading, to like a scoring system. I mean, I'm looking at the table in the document you just mentioned and referred us to. So at some point, you're going to have these scores that are going to divide people, the facilities you're looking at, into different categories, right?
So for the effluent and enforcement orders, these are a yes or no. Like, yes, the facility is an exceedance of their permit limit. They meet this criteria. So yes, they would be considered inadequate. So these ones are just binary. Yes, they meet this criteria, or no, they don't meet this criteria. The monitoring reporting violations, which we'll go through next, are different. That's where that scoring comes into play. I know it's confusing. I couldn't figure out a way to sort of clarify it better. But because of the way that the effluent data is laid out, we decided to do it this way. So these are binary yes or no's, in short.
Okay, so and obviously this is just a few examples of the effluent violation categories. You have 10, 12 different categories, right? Mm-hmm. So any one of those that meets this criteria of exceed permit limit, blah, 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 would be the trigger to that's it. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's not like a certain number of categories or something like that.
No, not for the effluent. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This is pretty much the way the significant non-compliance designation from EPA works. So that's the reason it's formatted this way, is it's tried to kind of keep it similar to that. Because it's a pretty well regarded designation, but yeah, pros and cons.
I just also, I think it's been said multiple times, want to emphasize, the core of these specifics and some discretion or nuance in binary versus additive scoring is coming from consultation with staff within the water board. It's not, when we say we, it's not just UCLA or the project team, and especially when it comes, I think, to the WDR inadequacy criteria. There's just a lot of different sort of indicators, but we leaned heavily on staff expertise as to where to draw the lines, as it were. But it is, it's necessarily complex and differentiated.
Yeah, and I saw the comment also about the TSOs not included. TSOs are included for the NPDS facilities, but they're not included for the WDRs, I believe is the case. And again, that was because of in conversation with staff and I believe also some other members of our advisory group, that TSOs were excluded for the WDRs. But yeah, that's one of the ones where you can kind of choose to go either or. But we decided to exclude them here. And these lists are going to be looked at by the regional board staff, and some systems will, or some facilities might be removed because the regional board staff say this facility has been completely fine for the last 5 years. They were in exceedance of their permit limit, 4.5 years ago. It doesn't really make sense to include them. So, that's a conversation that we're open to having with regional board staff. And so I'd say, there is some flexibility here. It's not just, we're not just going to send out the list blindly.
Debbie?
Sorry, I figured I'd go on camera this time. Anyways, I first of all appreciate this. I do have a couple questions. Is on the inadequacy list in the document, there's the TKN. I was wondering why that wasn't, if you know why that wasn't included with the other nitrogen speciations. And I'm leaving ammonia out because I could see why that would be separate, but I was curious about that one. You knew.
Honestly, I don't think I'm the right person to answer it. This is another area where I leaned heavily on the recommendation from staff, so I can inquire or look at it closer, but yeah, I can't say I have a good explanation for you.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll get back to you. Thank you.
Thanks on that. And then just one more clarification, because I feel like I heard it twice or two different ways. I heard that there was a yes or no on the effluent violations. Does it matter how many there are? And then how does that then balance with the other areas of enforcement and monitoring and reporting? So if you just have a yes, does that mean yes? I'm not understand. I guess I'm not understanding. Is it just yes in that category? Is it yes, you've had, 18 in this one and 15 in this one? How are you doing that?
Yeah, so the process is essentially has the facility exceeded their permit limit in any violation at all, but in like what is that permit limit exceedance percent? Okay, that's step one. Does the facility, is that exceedance above like the 20%, 40%, 60% limit? And then we're trying to see, okay, are there at least 2 violations that are within this 6-month period that are 2 months, maximum 2 months apart. So they're happening kind of back to back. And if that is the case, where they're having at least 2 months where there's violations within a 6-month period, so maybe it was January and March, or January and February, or all in January, doesn't really matter, then they're getting flagged as inadequate. So it's not necessarily the number of violations that's important. They could have 30 violations that are occurring over a 6-month period, and that's kind of treated the same as if a facility has 5 violations in the period. It's still considered inadequate either way. Oh, and you're muted.
Sorry, thanks. And then so okay, I understand that. I kind of understand that. I'm gonna just say it's a I'm still trying to get how, like, I understand the percent is the 20% or the 40 or the 60 or whatever that's what you're saying as percentage wise, right?
Mhm.
And then if it is in any one of these categories, or is each in the effluent violation category, you've got these different lines, right? There's 10 or 11. Is it any one of those, or is it,
Yeah.
when you're counting the 75%, are you counting it for all of those?
Yes, I see what you're saying. And then the executive summary, it's laid out slightly differently. Yeah. Yes, the 75% threshold applies, or sorry, not threshold, the 60% threshold or whatever applies to all of those different constituents. But they are each like their own, like you could be flagged as inadequate for each individual one. The analysis is done for each constituent one at a time. Does that, or am I
Okay.
continue? Maybe we should talk offline, but
Yeah, I think I might. I just maybe again. I'm like I love the suggestion. It's like, oh, can we do a test study and kind of walk it through that way? So
yeah.
it's not as abstract. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think once we're able to share the actual lists of facilities, I have all the violation details like laid out within another sheet. So that would also be, useful for us to be able to look at together. Okay, Cecile.
Oh, thank you so much. And I appreciate you answering my TSO question. I'm in Region 3. I'm a water resource control engineer in Region 3. And we do have a couple TSOs that are active for facilities that, fit that inadequacy criteria. But we are in the midst of that review of the facilities that you've asked us to look at, and just had a couple questions about those. And I'm hoping now is a good time and just about the facilities, because some of them, I'm not too sure if this process is to include private for-profit facilities, because some of those do pop out on this, and we're talking like hotel resorts. While as we're going through this list and looking at those violations, they fit the definition, but are you still interested in these types of facilities?
I'm going to ask if Dakota or Maureen want to answer that, because I think it's a kind of a tricky middle ground where it's not transient like a campground or something. It is a,
No, it's like a resort.
Yeah. I will say that we had a long process of figuring out which facilities should be included or excluded. So they are included for a reason. I wasn't the person to sort of work on that. Maureen or Dakota, do you want to speak to that?
I was looking up the TCAN versus nitrate, so I missed the question. I'm sorry, Dakota, or if you're there, could you answer, or maybe we could repeat the question?
Yeah, if you could repeat the question, please. Sorry.
Well, in general, do private for-profit facilities that meet the inadequacy criteria, should those be considered as we go through this list?
So I think for the most part, those facilities were excluded to begin with from being considered for the inadequacy criteria, depending on what type of facility they are. If it's a gas station or something like that, where it's mostly a transient population that would be making use of the wastewater infrastructure, then it was excluded and isn't considered inadequacy at all.
All right. So if it just happened to pop up on our list, we can make a note of that. This should be part of the excluded facilities. And does that also include private for nonprofit like schools, HOAs, and RV parks?
So that's a little more complicated. RV parks were after talking with other water board staff, we made the decision to include RV parks because after the COVID pandemic and due to changing economic circumstances, a lot more RV parks are starting to allow permanent or long-term stays. And so we wanted to make sure that those people, those populations were included. HOAs, if they are managing the systems themselves, I believe they are included. In previous AG meetings, we've distributed both our full assessment matrix that identifies where each system falls, as well as rationalization for why a group is included or excluded as to be recommended for the inadequacy facility. So I believe those materials have been made available to AG members in the past.
All
Yeah,
right.
so we can share those full details with
Yeah.
you. They're public, but I realize you may not have seen them. So if you just shoot one of us an email, we'll send that over.
Sure. Well, and our concern is like the ultimate goal of this process is to provide infrastructure solutions and support. So, is this, process actually going to consider these facilities to obtain funding or no cost technical assistance? And so in Region 3, I think we'd like to filter out anything that, the ultimate goal of this process is not going to be looking at. And that's just why I ask.
Yeah, absolutely. We appreciate the close look, and yeah, we can, consider certainly if anything erroneous has made it onto the list that shouldn't be, but also regional board input on, which of these facilities are priorities, for lack of a better term. And certainly the goal, again, with the delineation of a list of systems being characterized as inadequate, at least that is the term for now, is to move toward analysis of potential solutions and funding. That is the goal. So we hear you, but thanks. I don't know if you had any other questions or comments.
No, that's it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'd say just in the comment, there's a comment sheet in the spreadsheets that were sent around. Feel free to just, if you think a facility shouldn't be included for whatever reason, just describe it there. That's really helpful for us. And we can go back and look at the past reasons we decided to include it. But yeah, I'll try to send you those materials so that you and your regional board staff can consider that. Thanks for the questions. Okay, so hi.
Hi, Grace. Sorry, I know you're moving on. I might have missed this. I just want to make sure. So your slide here for the WDR inadequacy lists about three, the nitrogen, biochemical, and oil, but the report that you provided us, there was a considerable longer list. So it's any of those that could trigger 2 or more NOVs that you are flagging. Is that correct?
Yeah, the executive summary has all of the constituents that we're looking at.
Right.
And all of the enforcement order types that we're looking at. But I will say the enforcement orders, we're just looking at, is there an active enforcement order present? Yes or no. Not if the enforcement order is related to one of those constituents.
Right.
So just,
So I'm just curious that since you listed these 3 on your slide, so while as you were going through the data, were these the prominent ones that were
No,
okay.
I just selected these 3 because they all had different thresholds, the 20, 40, 60, and they fit nicely in the slide.
Great. Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to move forward to the monitoring and reporting criteria. And again, they're just examples. And so if you want to see the full list, take a look at the executive summary or the advisory group summary. Those 2 words are interchangeable. So we're calling them different things. But yeah, so the structure of this is different than the effluent violations. And so again, I recognize this is confusing. I'll do my best to explain it, but what we're looking at here is counts of violations. So did the facility have one of these types of M&R violations? So I've used these 3 different M&R violations as examples because they are all weighted slightly differently. These weights came as recommended from water board staff that we were working with. 3 being the highest, the most important, critical, and 1 being the lowest weight. And so what happens is, let's say a facility has all 3 of these types of violations. So they had 1 unauthorized discharge violation, 1 sanitary sewer violation, 1 late report violation. That count is added up. Okay, they have 3 violations, but they also have a weight now of 3 plus 2 plus 1. So they have a score of 6, essentially. And what we're trying to do is identify the facilities that are in the top 25% of those scores. So maybe the range of scores goes from 0 to 100. We're trying to identify the facilities with scores of 75 and above. So these are facilities that, again, maybe they're only having unauthorized discharge violations, so they have a bunch of 3s in a row. that are being added up. Or maybe they have a variety of different types of violations. That's, that's fine too. But either way, those weights are getting added up together. We're getting a final score for the facility, and then we're seeing where it falls in that percentile. So that is, yeah, that's in short how it works. If you want to see the full weights and all of the different violation types that we're considering, those are in the advisory group summary. And yeah, this is looking over the last 5 years, same as everything else. Cecile.
Yeah, sorry about this. The SSO spills, will they be counted twice then? Because there's, facilities that are in a WDR, but then separately they're in the SSO order. So it seems like we're counting them here and when they're in the SSO spills as well.
Yeah, this is a thought I had too initially, but I think it doesn't occur in that way because of the permitting differences we're specifically looking at this portion of the WDR permit, so that is the facility itself, whereas the other analysis is looking at the collection system. So that is the differentiation there.
Gotcha. Okay. So maybe it's just semantics. So maybe that's just, and instead of, because SSO, sanitary sewer flow, is usually associated with the collection system. So you're talking about once it's entered the treatment facility, if there's any spills at the treatment facility. Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. It confused me too when I was initially working with this. So maybe there's maybe we can clarify this terminology better, but yeah, that's what we're talking about. Sharon?
Yeah, I kind of had that same question. So maybe you might just want to call it a sewage spill.
Okay.
Or
easy enough, yeah.
Or non-authorized discharge, but you have that right above, so maybe that's not the best.
Yeah, this is the terminology that it's used in CWICs. That's why it's called that. But I'm definitely not opposed to adjusting it. Okay. I think that's the last slide on this. Yeah, discussion, questions. We covered a lot during the presentation, so you don't feel like you need to ask a question, but I'm happy to go back and cover things or just have a broader conversation about the inadequacy analysis as a whole.
And our next step here is to take a break, right? So
Yes.
Just want to give people a heads up that we have a few minutes, but ideally we'd take a break in a few minutes. There will be open discussion at the end, and of course we have office hours and are responsive to questions and comments we get outside of those venues. But that being said, other comments or questions on all this? We know it's complex and nuanced, trying to be, fair to the differences between these facilities and system types and nuances that exist, but realize it's a lot to take in. And again, more details are in the executive summaries, but we're happy to talk it through as we can. So, Debbie?
I know I take up a lot of the time here, but thank you for going through this. I appreciate this and actually appreciate the opportunity now really to see some of the WDR criteria and where you were going with it. But just because I think this is the appropriate time, it was mentioned a couple times that Cass and Civic submitted a comment on the inadequate terminology that was used. And I just wanted to let kind of the advisory committee know. We did that because a lot of it is inadequate has a regulatory term to it. And this is supposed to be a non-regulatory area. And so we did suggest other terminology. I know this was picked up from the drinking water side, but on the wastewater side, there's very specific terminology in there. And it's something that's really important to our community that it, because words do matter. And so, and how you're labeled does matter. And we want both programs to succeed. So anyways, so thank you on that one. I guess in looking at the WDR criteria, and I don't know, Grace, how many agencies or how many facilities fell under this. I think the two comments right now, and we'll probably be giving some more comments later on this that I have, and maybe just also a question is that from what I'm understanding, what I'm thinking I'm understanding right now, let me just clarify this, is that if you fall under any one of these categories in effluent violations, you are already considered inadequate. Is that correct? You're on that list no matter what. It's not even a percentage of that. You're just on that list.
If you meet one of those effluent violation criteria, then yes, you are considered inadequate.
Okay. So I do think just looking at some of these things, I think that that's potentially could be a really big list. And we talked about this being on CWIX and about the limited amount of data that's available and where it might be. And so there's going to be some issues. I think that it might, I'm not sure what it will lead to, but it seems even beyond what we would see with the NPDES side of things. So, for example, on the settable solids, it's not a 40% is the number that's used before it is before it's considered for potentially even minimum mandatory penalties, and then there's even more than that. So this is a lot lower of a bar. And if it's just one of these things, it's even a lower part of a bar. And then I can't remember who put this comment in the chat, but totally agree with it again, is that if all we're looking at is, and I know you said that the staff is looking at this is the last 5 years and things have been done since then, it probably is going to give a bigger list and a lot more requirements for a lot more work. And so whether it is something more, more to the extent that was done with the sanitary sewer, where you're trying to not just focus on the whole last 5 years, but maybe even narrow it down, that might be an option. But like I said, as we're now that we're understanding this a little bit better, I think we're going to go back and talk a little bit more and hopefully get you some responses quickly on it. So thanks.
Yeah, what I can say from what we've seen so far on the WDR results is I would say it's comparable. The percentage of facilities identified as inadequate is comparable to the percentage of NPDS and sanitary sewer systems. Of course, there is issues with missing data from WDRs, so that's different. I also will say that for most facilities, we are seeing violations occurring that are being flagged as inadequate, are violations that are occurring, from 2021, 2022, going through 2024, 2025. There's a pretty small number of facilities where those violations were limited to like 1 year. That is like those types of facilities, though, are the ones that we would want to take a closer look at, where the violations are only occurring in 1 year. But just from having looked at the data, I can tell you that most facilities, the violations are spanning multiple years. So that's anecdotal, but yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Sharon?
Yeah, hi. I guess maybe kind of piggybacking on Debbie's comments, I did want to, kind of strongly just mention that, we really would prefer a different kind of terminology, not necessarily a different framework. I think you guys have put in so much work. We get that and we appreciate that hard work. I think it would really lead, people who are looking at this to a better understanding of what I think you're aiming for if you use like priority systems instead of inadequate systems to underscore the fact that certain systems maybe need more attention. And then to go with that, and I guess I was thinking of this as kind of a comment on how the inadequacy criteria are implemented as criteria themselves, but and maybe this is comment more for the future, but you might want to think about taking what sometimes the water board has used in other contexts where they call it a weight of evidence approach, and where it's taking multiple criteria like you have here and looking at them, like kind of looking at a way using multiple criteria as a way to prioritize the highest priorities by saying, like, if you have multiple problems or inadequacies or violations, if you will, in multiple categories, that may bump you up to a higher level of priority in terms of the facility or the agency if it's got a collection system and a wastewater treatment facility, whether it be NPDES or WDR. So in other words, you can use all the data and work that you've done to create this whole system to then prioritize within these lists, because you can't, I don't think the water boards are necessarily going to be able to do something about every single facility or system that's identified. So that would be something that needs a lot more further thought, but I would kind of offer that as a concept to maybe start building out as this moves forward.
Yeah, thanks. We hear you for sure. Okay, I do want us to go to break so that we have time to rest our brains for a moment. So I'm gonna return at 10:50. We probably won't start right then, but just I would say we can start 2 after, maybe like 10:52, something like that. All right, be free.
We
Oh,
can't
sorry,
hear you.
I was muted. Yeah, sorry. I will reply, or maybe someone else can reply or I can do it after the risk. But I see it. Thank you, Danya.
Yeah, I think we're gonna move to the risk criteria in the interest of time, but we can answer that question certainly. And I'll just kick us off by saying, again, thank you for wading through all these different criteria. We know there's a lot, but we're trying to be specific and transparent. And the risk criteria, we do have quite a bit that we've been able to develop since the last time we shared the basic criteria in terms of specific data sources and scores and weights that are proposed. And just as a reminder, the main purpose of the risk criteria is to, and Grace will say more in a second, but is to flag systems that are at risk of becoming inadequate. Again, as the current terminology goes, we recognize the request to change the terminology. But the risk criteria also can enable just a better understanding of facilities and systems and broader risk and just population characteristics of those systems, which to date have not been fully available or put together in the way that this effort will be able to do. So with that, I'll turn it over to Grace to run through what we're looking at in terms of the risk criteria.
Great. Thanks everyone for joining us again. Same as with the inadequacy criteria, I recommend looking at the executive summaries. There's a good amount of information there and full tables that might be helpful. Yeah, we're gonna just set expectations again of sort of like where we're at, where we've come from. You all have heard a bit about the risk assessment, but I do believe it's been less detailed than the inadequacy criteria in past presentations. And that's largely just because we've kind of had pedal to the metal in the inadequacy criteria. whereas there's a little bit more breathing room with the risk. And so the risk criteria is pretty well developed at this point, but we are still open to feedback on refining the thresholds, scores, and weights from each variable that I'll walk through. So yeah, just as a FYI of sort of like where we're at in our work is we have the criteria set up, but we are still working on actually running the analysis and making sure the numbers all make sense. So if you do have feedback on specific variables, I'd say let us know, and we might be able to make those changes or adjustments. And yeah, once we do actually complete the analysis and have numbers, then we might go back and sort of adjust things if results seem off or something weird has appeared in the results. So yeah, this is all just a little less finalized than the inadequacy is. And just like the inadequacy, though, you will have the opportunity to review the at-risk lists prior to their finalization. You can provide comments on the facilities and systems that are included or thoughts on the analysis methods then. We don't have an official review timeline for the at-risk assessment in the same way that we do the inadequacy, just because we're not fully there yet. But when we do, we will get that to you and share it publicly. This is our definition of risk that we've been working with. We're defining it as a wastewater system or facility confronting circumstances which threatens its ability to continue adequately treating and disposing of wastewater. So essentially, we're trying to identify facilities and systems that are at risk of potentially becoming inadequate in the future. And of course, our goal is to help implement interventions and identify funding sources to address the concerns or the issues that the system is facing. Okay, this is a lot already. I'm looking at my slide. All right, let's start with the sanitary sewer systems or the collection systems. Again, this is just an example criteria or an example variable for one of the many variables that's included in the wastewater needs assessment. The reason this one, I started with this is because it's for sanitary sewer systems, and this criteria or this variable only applies to sanitary sewer systems. This applies to column as we're in the advisory group summary. You can see some of the variables apply to all of the facilities and systems. Others apply only to one or two. This one is specific to sanitary sewer systems because it's looking at the system's flow relative to its population served. So this is just an example of a variable. We have multiple different thresholds here. So less than 120 gallons per capita per day, less than 275 gallons per capita per day. That's for dry weather flow, or this is for wet weather flow. I apologize, this is wrong. What they both say dry. Okay. One of them is supposed to say wet. So then we have the score, because these are both sort of normal numbers. If they're below these thresholds, their score would be 0, meaning 0 times the variable's weight, which is 3, because this is quite an important variable, would be 0. Whereas if the system's flow is above these numbers, then their score is a 1, because it's considered at risk. That 1 is multiplied by the variable's weight, and that's how you end up with the score of 3 here. This is kind of hard to fully, I think, understand without looking at all of the variables that are in the risk assessment, but there's just so many that we didn't want to include them all here. So please look at the table in the assessments or in the summaries. But I guess I'll just pause. Is that a minus sign? No, it's not a minus sign. Average dry weather flow. It's saying whether or not I'm talking about average dry weather flow or average, this should say wet weather flow. I'm sorry, that's wrong. Yeah, wet weather flow. Yes. So the bottom cells are supposed to be wet weather. But does anyone have questions just about kind of the setup here? So score, weight, weight, threshold, what all this means? I know it's a little confusing. Paul?
Yeah, I don't understand the part before and after the dash. So if it's dry
Okay.
weather flow, why are you talking about I&I?
Well, I guess the assumption would be that it wouldn't be an issue, but it's just saying that if the facility's flow is less than 120 gallons per day, then
So their total, you're talking about their total flow in dry weather
yeah.
is less than
Mhm.
120. And so presumably there is not I&I. That's what I don't understand why you're labeling that as I&I.
It's labeled this way because this is what EPA, these are the numbers EPA uses for INI or for like the flow rates as being at risk or of concern. They include inflow and infiltration. That's what INI stands for anyone who's not following along. I could exclude it here if you think it doesn't make sense, but yeah, EPA includes it, so that's why I included. I guess yeah, it is a little repetitive because supposedly if it's dry weather flow, there shouldn't be INI, but it's looking at the overall flow rate.
So conceptually, if they are, this is the capacity, not what they're flowing. So
Hmm.
if they have capacity to handle, no, if the capacity is more, this is the capacity is 120 gallons or the flow?
No, this is the flow relative to the population served.
Okay, so if the flow is more than 120 gallons per person per day in dry weather, that's presumably all sewage flow, and it is a lot of flow because we don't expect that much flow per person per day in normal residential services. But of course, if there's a lot of industrial services, it's going to be more than 120 gallons per person per day. It might be 1,000 gallons per person per day if it's mostly industrial waste and not much residential. Or is this just residential flow?
Well, the collection systems that are included in the wastewater needs assessment are supposed to be domestic flow, like systems receiving domestic wastewater. Um, I would assume that, I don't know, I don't feel like I'm the person who can speak to this perfectly, but yes, the wastewater needs assessment is supposed to be focused on domestic flow or domestic wastewater.
Right, but there might be some, okay, so
Yeah,
presumably not much commercial and industrial, and that's why this is considered a high flow. Now,
yeah.
in wet weather, it isn't considered high flow until it gets over 275 gallons per
Hmm.
person per day, which suggests that they're okay with 150 gallons per person per day of I&I, and that wouldn't be considered a problem. I consider that a problem, but this framework says that's okay.
Yeah.
That's not a problem.
I mean, that is what this framework is saying. I would say if you do have specific recommendations on what the numbers should be, or you have thoughts on why these don't work, um, that's helpful commentary. I'm not a wastewater engineer, so I'm not exactly sure what the best numbers should be. These were taken from EPA's work, um, and what they, refer to usually. So.
And last question, I'll think about that. Thank you. I probably will have some thoughts, and I'm glad there is still time frame to work on these because it's just the risk category. The last thing, this doesn't actually deal with the sizes of pipes. The pipes may be sized for these high flows. And so there's no real physical problem. It's just kind of a conceptual problem. And I mean, this doesn't address the pipe sizes. So we don't know
Yeah,
if
I
there's a
mean,
physical flow problem.
certainly we
Yeah.
don't have information on that as we don't have many information on many things. So these are indicators of risk. But yeah, we don't. If we had that information, perhaps we could use it, but we don't. And similarly, I think I do get, I think, where you're going with kind of the commercial industrial customer base within the system. I don't think we have data that allows us to differentiate much there, but to the extent that we do, I do think we could nuance this variable, but we'll have to get back to you on that. It's a good point if we're able to operationalize, but frankly, with a lot of the risk criteria, we don't have any options in terms of the additional data points we can play with. But wherever we see opportunities and there are data, again, that are statewide for these facilities and systems, we're all ears.
Yeah.
Sharon?
Well, I think I mainly want to kind of agree and underscore some of what Paul was bringing up. I think a lot of his questions were good ones and ones that we're thinking about. And I think we'll try to give you some comments in the next week or, very soon. But along those same lines, I do think this is not, it's supposed to capture the INI, but it's not INI only because it is the base flow plus that what they would consider excess flow. So really the first threshold of the less or greater than 120 gallons per capita per day is really just your average dry weather flow. I think that's what that's supposed to be. It doesn't reflect INI until you go above thresholds, right? So, and that is typically, although not always, but typically that would be during wet weather. So I think that's the way I was thinking about it. I don't think for the sanitation district system, I mean, there are a couple of plants that have between 10 and 20% non-residential flows coming in. Most of the others are much less, a much smaller percent, so it would not probably be very significant in terms of these numbers. But another concept, and again, I don't know if this is reported like in a database, so it might not be, I don't know if you can operationalize it or use it, but it's sort of the same concept, but a peaking factor. So what's the top rate that, what can your system convey throughout your conveyance system down to the treatment plant? And then so in other words, like during wet weather, we may see our flows double. So that's a peaking factor of 2. This ratio of, I may have calculated it wrong, but if you calculate the ratio of 275 to 120, you get a peak, you get a factor. So anyway, I'll stop there, but we'll try to think of what comments we can provide that hopefully can be helpful.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. And yeah, this is just one of the many variables that you could provide comments on. So this is just an example of one, but yeah, we're doing our best, but I feel that I chose a confusing one to use as the example. So take a look at the advisory group summaries and see, if you have comments on any of the other ones. I'm going to go to another. This is for NPDS facilities only. So this is if the facility is nearing their discharge limit, that's detailed in their permit. So I'm already seeing another typo on this. This is supposed to be 0.5, not 0.6 in the max score, but this is only relevant to NPDS facilities because we don't have this data for the WDRs. And so we can only do this for the NPDS facilities. So again, if the facility is sort of over 20%, so they're not very close to their discharge limit, then that's not considered at risk. If they are within 11 to 20% of the limit, so they're getting closer, that's 0.5. And then if they are within 10% of their discharge limit, then that is considered at risk because they're at risk of exceeding their DMR effluent limit. This is weighted as 1, just because this is data that we're sort of coming up with a new variable here. This hasn't really been done before, so we've weighted it less here just because, yeah, it's sort of an experimental analysis, although I think that this variable makes a lot of sense, but it just hasn't been operationalized in an assessment like this, and so we didn't want to weight it super high in case, things came up that we weren't expecting. But yeah, if people have questions here, Sharon.
So are you thinking this would apply to all effluent limits in a permit? Because some of them are set as, most of them you're not supposed to exceed, but occasionally there are ones that you can't go below. So you need to take that into account. It may be the opposite. And then I guess there's variability, right, in the discharges and in the effluent. So, it's not always going to be a trend that you're going to see, right, or below a certain percent below the limit. So if it's a treatment, like the secondary treatment limits, like, where you need treatment removal, so they're technology-based limits, that probably works better. If it's the water quality-based limits, I don't know. There's a lot of things we don't have as maybe tight of control over because they're not all subject to our, perfect controls. Like some things come from consumer products, and small amounts of domestic use can put us over limits. An example I would give is like lindane or pesticide use, where people wash out a container and throw it down the drain, and that can, if we have very, very low limits, that might put us out of compliance. It's or near the compliance limit, right? It might just raise it a little bit. It just happens to be when you take your sample. So there's a lot of variability.
Yeah. So this is looking at facilities that are above a certain like slope of approach. So if they are, I forget what the exact methods are behind this, but essentially if the facility, we calculate a slope from like the change in their exceedance value from the last 5 years up to the present. And if it's above that slope, or like change of exceedance, then we consider it for this variable, I believe. Sorry, I worked on this a long time ago. And yeah, it's coming back to me. What you just said is reminding me additionally of why it's weighted as a 1, is that, some of these constituents or effluent violations, facilities will consistently be under their exceedance level on purpose, but they are maybe close to their exceedance level or their permit limit, but they're not over it. And, we recognize that that's normal. But yeah, there's a lot going on here. Again, we haven't actually run the numbers, so I would say this could change, but this is, one that we're working on figuring out. So yeah, if you have specific recommendations, send them along. Debbie?
Thanks, Grace. Actually on as I was seeing what you were trying to do here, one of the big areas that we're missing, again, with that idea of identifying what some of the financial needs are, this is where, whether you've got a compliance schedule on your permit, you've got new permit limits, you got a compliance schedule, whether it's in there or it's as a TSO or it's whatever, where you're being required to do or build something. This is an important area to be able to recognize that as part of the needs assessment, right? As part of the need. And they may not be out of compliance at that point, or they may be, but they may or may not be out of compliance at that point. But there is a huge, financial need or need for improvement at that point. So I didn't see that in the list, and I'm not exactly sure how to incorporate that, but I feel like, based upon what you did in the other assessment, the inadequacy assessment, there might be some carryover there where it doesn't quite hit that mark, but we know that that becomes a need. And some of that part seems a little lost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I guess I think the variable is still included is if the facility is discharging to an impaired water body, the reasoning there that was included was there might be some additional requirements that the facility is then going to have to follow, which could come with additional monitoring and, might cause them to have more violations and have to make changes that could be costly. So that was one thing, one way we were trying to consider that. And then this variable, also, I think the idea is that if we can identify facilities that aren't currently out of compliance, but might be out of compliance in the future, is that, yeah, then they might have additional financial or monitoring requirements put upon them. So, I would say that thought was a part of the construction of this, but if you feel like there's a better way of getting at that, definitely open to hearing it.
So I think it still may not capture all of that. So the impaired water body, it might not be impaired. Like Sharon said, it might be a new effluent limit, but that new effluent limit, because you've got a compliance schedule, may not be out there until 5-10 years from now. So you might have a final effluent limit, but you have a interim left effluent limit. You're complying with the interim, but it's not the final. But you got to get to that final within that time frame. So that's what I'm trying to capture, or to talk about. And in some cases, it is um, there's a reason, they are in violation of a new, potentially a new limit that comes into play, and then or it's something that's coming into play, and they're in a time schedule order in that case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just writing everything down. Okay.
I think another thing just to note, because we're not certainly going to be able to run through each of the criteria here, and we have shared the indicators before, but there is new information. The advisory group summary is on the operationalizing the criteria. But I do want to note, and I think we can note in the write-up as it reaches the public is around some of these factors are sort of exogenous or outside a system's control entirely. Some are endogenous, or one would presume they're within system or facilities control or influence, and then some are in between. But we do recognize that some are factors that create a risk for a system or facility, but don't reflect the system or facilities anything under their control. But that is part of the risk criteria analysis. But we recognize it, especially also in terms of moving forward, that systems and facilities can only control or influence some of the factors that are here, and others again can impact them but are harder to address. So just want to note that, because that's a theme throughout, and a common sort of nuance that has to take place in a risk analysis of this sort.
Mm-hmm. Mino?
Yeah, Grace. I might have missed this in the summary document, but have you considered or thought about also the recharge impact that might be there if it's being if the effluent is being discharged into a water body, an adjacent water body? So have you considered the NPDES discharge limits? And I guess there's a functional equivalence if they are recharging before it goes out to a water body.
No, that's not something we've considered. I'd say beyond obviously identifying what water body they are discharging to and what the requirements are for that water body. But yeah, no, we haven't considered recharge. And again, if you have recommendations on how we could consider it, I'm open to that. But yeah, not something currently included.
Okay, yeah, so maybe later on, or maybe in the office hours, I will provide for an example in the Middle Santa Ana River that might be helpful and, might give you some insight on how to maybe include it or at least just mention it in the summary document.
Okay, thank you. Okay, last example here is for WDR. This is very similar to the effluent violations for the inadequacy assessment. Like the description says, it builds upon the WDR inadequacy criteria. So for example, if the inadequacy exceedance threshold is at 20%, then the at-risk threshold is from 0 to 19%. So anything, or 19.999, whatever. So any violation that is in exceedance of their permit limit but isn't quite over that inadequacy threshold is considered at risk. And this one is weighted as a 2. I think this one's more straightforward, and so I'll take an opportunity here to just sort of say, big picture, the way we're hoping to identify at-risk facilities would then be you add up all of the different scores of their risk profile for each facility and system, and you come up with sort of an array of variables, array of results from maybe the facility is there's some zeros, again, all the way up to 100 or whatever the numbers may be, and we will sort of work from there to figure out what the distribution looks like, and what might be a reasonable cutoff point to consider the facilities that are at risk or not. But we don't really have that number set out because we haven't done the analysis yet. We don't know what the data looks like. So there's not a clear limit on yes or no, this is the score at which a facility is considered at risk after we add up all of these variables. But that'll be something that we talk about in the future. Okay. I think that's everything for the risk assessment. I really do encourage you guys to take a look at those summaries. Come to office hours. We will share the slide at the end of this presentation about when the office hours are. They are going to be starting next month again. I think we have them in February and March. And yeah, we really welcome your feedback. So appreciate you taking the time. Okay, does anyone else have comments on the risk assessment as a whole before we move forward? What do you have?
Yeah, this is a lot of new information. Thank you for providing that. I think we're going to take our time to review it and provide comments. Just curious, which stage are you at? Do you already have the data on all of these variables? Are you in data cleaning stage, collection stage?
Yeah, we have all of our data sources identified pretty much. Some are easier to pull data than for others. I'd say we know where most of our data can come from and how to get it. We do have some of the data pulled already, not all of it. And the next step would be working to sort of build the data analysis architecture of how to integrate everything together. That's where we're at.
Yeah, because I was noticing on the executive summary that you shared that if some facilities do not have data available, they will be included in the inefficient data category for right now. So I'm curious if there will be some data issues that you encounter and you will have to revise the list of operational, environmental, or any of those categories. So that's the reason I asked that question.
Yeah, the goal was was to have the variables that we included, that they would have data available for most of the facilities that are included in the risk assessment. So we excluded variables where we knew that maybe 50% of facilities just didn't have data for that variable. So most of the variables that are still included, I believe we should have sufficient data. And if there's one variable where a facility or system is missing a data point, like that doesn't mean we are going to put it in the insufficient data category. That category is really for facilities and systems where we're missing a significant amount of data. That would be mostly like monitoring and reporting or effluent violation data. Like we just fully can't evaluate the status of that facility. Less so for the risk assessment, where we get to pick and choose which variables we include, and hopefully those variables work for most of the systems and facilities. But we will see.
Sounds good. Thank you.
As the last portion of the meeting, we're going to talk about spatial location and matching, and that's essential to especially some of the environmental and socioeconomic variables that we certainly have not been able to actually run that match yet, because we're still working on spatial location and mapping of the systems. But yes, as Grace said, we did already exclude variables which were considered and we would love to include, but we can't possibly get enough data coverage on. But likely, unfortunately, we will have to drop, one or more variables as we work with the data, and maybe there's data quality issues or missingness that we didn't see before. But the aim is to operationalize all of these, and we're beginning, or we're in the process of doing that. So, but it's a first time effort again, and even more so than the inadequacy effort. It's more of an experiment also, because there are not as well laid out, obviously not speaking here of mostly of regulatory adjacent criteria, and there's not sort of as much literature in the academic space around risk factors for these specific types of facilities and systems, as opposed to more generically for wastewater systems or treatment plants in particular. But that being said, again, that's our task, and we welcome all your input and advising along the way. So, Cecile?
Hi, yeah, thank you. And so along those same lines, the water boards have been tasked to look at this list, and we understand CWIX does not have all the data. And so expectations is my question of each region, when we're going through this this list that's been, produced by this initial round. Each staff can go through and start, looking at monitoring reports or missing monitoring reports, and this list is going to change, more than likely. Is that expected, or is it more of, this is the list we have, this is what we're going to go with? Just, exclude something that's really doesn't meet the criteria, but otherwise, let's just go with this first round.
I would say that I'm kind of speaking for the group, but speaking for myself, that I don't expect staff to go one by one through systems and facilities. But if you feel like there's a benefit to doing that, like, of course, I would say do what works for you and your colleagues. But I'd say we're mostly looking for facilities or systems that really stand out as, hey, this is missing, or this seems incorrect for this facility to be included. And then if there's some additional sort of digging into reports that is needed, taking that next step. But I also just want to be clear that the list that you guys were sent just includes the inadequate facilities, not the at-risk. The at-risk will be coming later. So yeah, those are two different lists that will be shared.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
But yeah, I don't know, Danya or Greg, if you have comments for sort of how much review is expected, but that's my take.
I wasn't quite clear if you were asking about the inadequacy list or potentially later on the sort of at-risk list, but I'll defer to Danya in any case, in
I
terms
think
of.
Cecile is referring to the inadequate list because
Right,
that's what I sent on Monday, the 26th, to all the regional water boards. So she's asking how deeply she and her staff dive into the list, because as I was trying to, in some of the communications that already I had with her and other regional boards, I mean, the regional boards are super busy and they are working in many projects as we speak. So I think it's in my comment is in the same lines that Grace's was. We don't expect you to go through each facility in a lot of detail, but if something big jumps out of you or your staff, because you guys know, I mean, you can tell me right away, oh, with within your first 5 minutes, which facilities are inadequate, and you are having to do a lot of compliance and enforcement and a lot of follow up with them, and which facilities are maybe at risk. So that's kind of, if you can invest some time just looking at the list and saying, this one, it wasn't in our radar, or you're missing some that we are dealing with them and we are having a lot of trouble. And so that's kind of the feedback that we are looking for. And especially with WDRs, I think the numbers are underestimated because of the missing information in compliance and enforcement within CWICs and all of that. So we are relying a lot on you, the regional boards, to tell us, you miss a couple of facilities here, and perhaps you don't have this compliance and enforcement information. We are working maybe informally with the facilities to not hammer them right away with violations and everything, but they definitely need help with future funding infrastructure. So that's the point where we are coming from, of what kind of infrastructure need those facilities might be needing, and that's why they need to get in the list, not because we want you to start pursuing regulatory actions, but if you think those facilities need to be considered for future funding wastewater infrastructure, it will be important for them to be as part of the list. And as I mentioned earlier, if you are already working on some facilities and this list seems to you that is redundant, because why are you listing these systems? We are already working with them so hard. And but that's why in some of the worksheets, we explicitly included information on, okay, if these facilities, you are already working with them, how far are you in terms of the process? I mean, do they already have funding? If so, that will be important, because Maureen's team from the Office of Water Programs at Sacramento State University, they are going to come in, take those inadequate facilities and come up with potential solutions and costs. But if you already have worked with these facilities and they are working via loans or grant funding, and they already have that system and process in place, and they are well in their way to fund those infrastructure needs, it will be very useful for the next team, so they don't include that cost in the overall costs and solutions that is going to be kind of the next step. So in a
Okay,
nutshell.
that's good clarification now, because I mean, we definitely have some sites that already got, got some, is on the, intended use list, with state. But
yeah,
okay,
that would be
so
fantastic if you can just mention that. I mean, you don't have to go into a lot of details, because we have access to the Division of Financial Assistance database, so we can dig on the specifics on the amounts and all of that. But if you can say they are already in the fundable list, that's a lot of information that will be tremendously useful for the next steps.
Sure. Okay.
And Maureen, did you want to say something? I saw your hand raised, but then it was lowered, so I assume not. But
Danya covered it. I just wanted to make sure that it was mentioned that we're also looking for systems that are on their way to receiving help or addressing their issues.
right. Okay. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to pass it back to Greg, since I think we're good here and want to leave time for the next section. So thanks for listening. And yeah, please provide your comments. I look forward to talking to you guys more in office hours. And yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Grace. And again, we should have time for discussion question at the end, but we obviously want to end by 12:30. So I'm going to go ahead and lead us through our final section on spatial location and mapping. You also hear from Dan Coffey, colleague who's been working with some of the data. But I want to start by saying that sort of the data environment for mapping and spatial location of wastewater systems and facilities is growing. And this is an exciting time to be working in this space, including the release by the US EPA, in 2025, don't recall the exact date, around the sewer sheds of the United States mapping tool, which is really a first time effort. And yeah, if you're interested, just wanted to provide an FYI on this data source, which we're also looking at. We don't expect it to be used directly in this effort because we think we're going to be able to do better spatial location attribution for the types of facilities that are in the EPA's database, a lot of which are also estimated. That being said, it's again a great resource and probably especially useful outside of California. But it does signal again that there's better data availability and better ability to map just a bunch of different things, as our spatial and technology tools are enhanced. This is, what we're reporting on here is, technically part of phase 2B of our contracted effort. And again, we're not, and I shared this slide in our last meeting, but the goal, or what we're really reporting on here, is the production or compilation of spatial data sets, again, of the three types of facilities and system types we're analyzing in the wastewater needs assessment. And that's both to be used in subsequent board internal use and public mapping, as well as to be used instrumentally in other parts of the wastewater needs assessment that we've already been discussing and will be discussing more. We're not here today to talk about modeling of unsewered areas because there will be a full and final sort of update on the results of that analysis in April. But we are here again to talk about what we're able to do and what we're working on and how it'll be used for spatial location for the other three, or the three facility and system types on the list, those being again SSGO, collection systems, and PDS and WDR facilities. Just as a matter of sort of practicalities of spatial data, we're either working with points, point location based on addresses or polygons, essentially shapes or boundaries, to identify the spatial location of systems. The points may either be the centroid of the system, or in some cases, we're needing to rely on any valid address we have for the system. But the ideal method to characterize spatial location is, of course, to obtain the actual boundaries or service areas or impacted areas of each system in the form of what's known as a shapefile polygon. That being said, the collection systems are the only facility or system type of the three with true sort of service boundary polygons that we're currently able to work with. And then the table below is just a reminder of how many different facilities and system types we're trying to collect and aggregate spatial information for in one place. So there's quite a few that we're trying to work with and clean the data and be able to use in different parts of the analysis going forward. And again, of course, we're going to focus here on the uses of the spatial data for the wastewater needs assessment, but want to also note that and give credit to the water board and those who reported the collection systems and others who reported their spatial boundaries as part of the sanitary sewer system service area boundary map order that's listed here, and wherein the reporting was or the input of data and sharing of data was wrapped up at the end of this last year. We want to note also many representatives of the systems and facilities had already submitted shapefile and spatial information well before the required deadline to assist our efforts. So thanks to everyone. And then a lot were submitted, at the deadline. So we are working with a pretty fresh and robust set of data associated with this requirement. That again spans beyond certainly the wastewater needs assessment effort. I also want to note the unsewered model, which again we'll discuss in April, also has uses in public and for the board beyond the wastewater needs assessment effort. That being said, again, we're here in the wastewater needs assessment advisor group call. So we're here mostly to talk about how the spatial data is going to be used for other parts of the assessment. It really is mostly a means to an end here. Want to note that spatial location is the factor that could be used to characterize systems and facilities based on spatial location is not being used in the inadequacy analysis. So nothing about location except as it relates to other requirements based on location is being used for the inadequacy analysis. So we haven't had to use that data and won't be using that data to adjust anything in the inadequacy analysis as of now. We do not anticipate that. But spatial location and mapping is a key input to the calculation of many of the risk factors, especially, again, socioeconomic type factors, as well as environmental factors. And you will hear more in future meetings about especially the attribution of climate risk, different types of climate risk data that are only available if we know where the systems are and what kind of their boundaries look like. And then spatial location is also a key input to the integration solutions analysis and the costing of especially integration opportunities as part of the solution set that OWP is working on. So where are we at with the three different system and facilities types? For this, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Dan Coffey, first to give us an update on the collection or SSS-GEO systems.
Thanks, Greg. Good morning, everybody. So the good news is that given the most recent influx of data that we got around that December 31st deadline that Greg referenced, we're sitting on what we think is a pretty comprehensive data set in terms of how many of the systems in the state are included within it. Right now, it contains about 862 unique systems, which would put us at about 85% of the total number of systems that are in the state. We actually think that may be a slight undercount, but given some of the small uncertainties with identifiers included in the multiple data sets we're working from, that's our conservative estimate. Right now, we're in the process of consolidating the different data sources that we've been given over the last few months and putting them into a single cohesive system map that eliminates any sorts of redundancies or inconsistencies. These limitations have created some challenges with creating this single cohesive data set. Some that can be flagged. Different approaches have used identifiers inconsistently. In some cases, data sets present system names without corresponding WDIDs. or the system names that are included may be different in one data set versus another, or they may be misspelled or abbreviated, which makes it a little more time consuming to consolidate them together. It involves a lot more kind of meticulous human manual review rather than being able to automate the process and consolidate things because they are exact matches to each other. There's also some cases where we've encountered in the spatial data that different mapping data sets have used different approaches, particularly when it comes to systems that have multiple distinct areas that are not contiguous. In some cases, we see certain systems that are fragmented, and one data set will still classify it all as a single attribute, attribute being like a single data entry in the spatial mapping software, whereas a different data set may have, 5 or even 10 separate attributes for each individual parcel, even though they're all the same system and they all have the same identifier. So we're working to rectify those and minimize those inconsistencies as we go about bringing all of the data under a single roof. Can we go to the next slide, Greg? Thank you. So just to illustrate really quickly some of the types of inconsistencies we're working with and the challenges of bringing together different spatial data sets, you can see some examples here of what we're encountering. Because we have these multiple partially redundant data sources, and in some cases we don't have cross-comparable identifying information to go along with that, we need to take an approach that minimizes redundant overlapping areas, but we're trying our hardest not to discard any covered area. That is, if any of the data sets we've been given thus far have a portion of the state that we can keep the polygon there and keep the coverage and generate the climate risk and population and other community characteristic attributes for it, we want to do that. Some of the examples of what can happen, though, you can see here. Firstly, on the left, you can see in some cases we have uniquely ID'd system boundaries within others. That's actually not always a problem. In some cases, we may have tributary systems that are within a broader system, each of which has its own separate identifier, and that may be correct. But in some cases, it's a little more of a gray area. We need to double check. There's also several cases, like you can see in example 2 here, where between different data sets, there are discrepancies on what they're classifying as a given system's area. They have, a system that has the same identifiers, but they disagree on what part of the state in terms of the physical boundary that system is serving. And so what we're working to do is identify what data set should be considered the definitive or the primary, and then we'll supplement that with secondary or tertiary sources so that any remaining area is still captured by our analysis. And then lastly, we're taking a similar approach with something like you can see on the right, where you have 2 different data sets that just disagree on where the border between 2 systems is. And I apologize if you can hear my dog barking in the background. Again, we're just kind of taking an approach to make sure that that redundant area doesn't get double counted in anything, but that we're still generating the community characteristic data that goes along with both of those systems on either side of the boundary. Let's go to the next slide, please, Greg. Did you want to talk about this, Greg, or do you want me to go with this?
Yeah, I will jump back in here and say, so that's largely the story with collection systems. It's tremendous amount of data and give me a tremendous product, I think. To have put together for the first time in this way statewide with very good coverage, but there are a lot of issues to work through in boundary rectification and all sorts of sort of matching, as is inevitable with putting together a data set of this type at the scale. So I think, where the data are at is really looking good considering the timeline with which things have been submitted and the way that such processes go. It's a little bit of a different story with the NPDS and WDR facilities. Again, inherently, because they're different types of facilities with different spatial sort of footprints than collection systems. And we do not have, again, shapefiles for these systems typically, or in very few cases. So our best case, in order to attribute sort of impact area or affected area, is to pair with the collection system boundaries where it's possible. But again, there's many cases where you have multiple collection systems serving the same treatment facility or vice versa. So it's not clean to do so in many cases, and in other cases, it's not possible to do the matching because we don't have the information. So in many cases, we're looking at an approach of using an address for these types of facilities. Again, we have some cases where the best addresses, or we have multiple addresses for a facility, as is not surprising, but we have to choose between them for the most accurate characterization of sort of the area served. And for some WDR facilities, we have issues with having a single valid address because there's a PO box, or we don't have an address at all, or incomplete address information. So one of the questions we want to ask, and there'll be a slide in just a second where we'll actually ask you to weigh in, is in cases where we only have that point or address data, what people think about either using just that single address to match to something like a census tract or neighborhood characteristics, or whether drawing a buffer or boundary around those facilities and drawing that buffer size based on either population or flow is a superior approach. Recognizing again that either is very much an estimation, and either approach would lead to different types of expected error. And also, we'll close before we enter the discussion on spatial location mapping by saying we are, mandated to work over the next several months with the spatial data that we have in hand, really, this month. So we are doing our best with the data that we have. We recognize in some cases we don't have complete data, and the quality of the data are certainly not ideal, especially when we look at WDR and NPDS facilities. So this, the collection and cleaning and consistency of spatial data represents certainly an opportunity for continuous improvement beyond the lifespan of this wastewater needs assessment. And we will detail further opportunities we see for that, as well as challenges to doing that and improving, enhancing this data in our final report roadmap. We also, though, want to recognize, again, even through the collection of the, no pun intended, collection system boundaries, that's been a tremendous effort and is already leading to much more refined spatial data than was available for the state previously. And recognize that, nationally and among other states, California is among the leaders in terms of aggregating its spatial data. Massachusetts was really the only state that we were able to identify that might be further ahead in terms of spatial data location and mapping for its wastewater systems. But for a lot of other states, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to find the types of information that we're able to find, and certainly to be able to produce and put together under this effort. So again, we see this as an opportunity for improvement and enhancement in the future, but also that this effort alone will yield significant improvement in the data environment to identify where these systems are and what populations they serve. So I think with that, we want to open the floor. We are still open to any suggestions you have, especially on ways to identify location information, as well as to calculate, again, second or third best spatial matching processes. And then in particular, around the question of either using single address information or potentially drawing buffers to estimate populations affected near or around treatment facilities. So I see we already have Sharon and then Cecile. I'll go to you first, Sharon.
Thank you. Just a couple questions and thoughts on data sources. I guess I just want to make sure I was clearly understanding what you're saying are I guess, the gaps or the challenges. Are you saying that you don't have actual locations for all of the treatment facilities? Is that accurate? Because I would think they would be in the permits, which makes me think the regional boards have that information, although maybe it's not in a database. I'm not sure, and easily accessed. And then my next thought is Google, like Google usually has a lot of stuff that, is they've done a lot of mapping, and I don't know how easy that would be to incorporate. And then my question was, just again, trying to clarify, like if you had a treatment plant, it sounds like what you're saying is that you don't have a sewer shed boundary. Is that what you mean? That's kind of the way I would think about it.
Yeah, on the last, yes.
Okay. Yeah, and I think those aren't routinely sort of shown in, like I wouldn't think that is routinely available. But that also leads me to a related question, which is how, I guess maybe you inherently have done this in putting together the jigsaw puzzle of collection systems, which is we have our, we're a large regional agency. We have our large sewers, and then we have dozens of satellite systems, and they have to kind of all fit together, right? And that's where you may get some little conflicts here and there, or overlaps or things like that, I imagine. But do I have the right concept of kind of what you're doing? You're putting together that jigsaw puzzle of all the different systems?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So yes, it's it can be more complicated with systems that have
So I don't know if this will be helpful, but the way we would identify our sewer shed is parcel data. So county assessors have parcel data IDs, and there's ones that are connected to the sewer. And so we have a whole database, or we work with the assessors, because we charge on the property tax rolls. So that's the natural database that could be used, at least for those sewer agencies or sanitation agencies that bill on property tax roll. That's how they would have a database that you could maybe use.
Okay. And we do have access to some parcel level data through the state, but I'm almost certain it doesn't contain that information. Then we'd have to go county by county, which practically becomes infeasible, unless I'm missing what you're saying.
No, I think that might be true. It might be something where you could either do it, do some kind of case study or testing, or try to see if you could use it for gaps. One or the other of those kind of ideas might be a way to explore that. Like you said, that might be a project for the future to do a complete mapping based on that. But if you wanted to test it out to see if it could work, then maybe that would, you could just try seeing if it could fill gaps that you have.
Yeah, thank you. And back to your, I guess, original, or the first two suggestions or questions. Yes, there are some facilities. I mean, I think we're only talking about WDR facilities where we don't have a complete address, or you have a PO box, which doesn't really give helpful information regarding an address. So we do have some of those cases. I don't think we have too many of them. But yes, in those cases, we may need to resort to Googling. I don't think we've gone there yet because
we have actually, Greg. We've done a manual review of several hundred facilities that either had no address information at all or just PO boxes, and we were able to find at least reasonably confident matches for a lot of them. There are still a handful, maybe a couple dozen, from the data that even with our review through Google Maps, we're still drawing a blank on where they actually are located.
Okay. Yeah. we're cannot keep track of all the work we're doing entirely, but thank you for that, Dan. And yes, I think, and I know we have a member of a regional board with their hand raised, but in cases where we can't identify, we, our last resort would probably be getting in touch with a regional board and seeing if we can get that information. But in some cases, I guess I can say based on past experience, we recognize that that may not be possible or may not be possible in short order. So again, there's an opportunity for improvement over time. But with that, Cecile.
Yeah, sure. So I am looking at the SWRCB website right now and really excited about it. And just my one comment or a couple comments is I noticed that the POTW is the flashing point and they are in the wrong location. And I realized that the permit that's being associated with it is the SSO permit. And I would recommend looking more at the facility permit itself because I feel staff pays a lot more attention to that permit than they do the SSO permit. And that data is like, I know I'm always making sure that that data in CWIX is accurate, especially, the facility location and how it shows up even in GeoTracker. And so I would suggest maybe looking at the permit that the facility is enrolled in and those Latin longs, possibly even the address to make sure those locations are a little more accurate. Does that make sense?
It does, although when you're saying what you're looking at is inaccurate, you are referring to the US EPA database, correct?
I am. Yeah, that's what that's what I'm looking at.
Okay, yeah, and again, that's helpful, and that's why we're at this point not
Mhm.
using that database directly. I was just sharing it as a resource because I think everyone on this call would be interested in it, but also as an opportunity to provide feedback and to vet, yes, our use of it as, again, down the list, use of potentially accurate data if we're failing to obtain spatial location for some systems. But our understanding and vetting of it, and again, this is a first time rollout on the federal level, is that it's a great resource. It's better than not having it, but there's a lot of inaccuracy and a lot of assumptions laden on assumptions and how that was derived. But they're gonna again enhance it over time as well.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were the one managing the data that was being presented here. So, yeah, and then as far as the point versus, like a bubble, um, either or, but my preference, I think maybe even just city boundaries would probably be even more accurate on the ones that you don't have data or an address on. I don't know. That was just my other thought.
When the facilities are run by the municipality or city or just
Right, right, yeah. Mhm.
yeah, that's yes, that is something we can do where we have the governance or ownership type identified, which we do have from a system. So yes, thank you for calling that out. Mac?
Yeah, but for the sanitary sewer like boundaries, a lot of places have sanitary sewer management plans, either with the city or the county or the actual facilities. I know that's a little more like you have to go to every single one for the locations, but a lot of times they'll have their area of responsibility for cleaning their sewer systems. I don't know if that's something that you've looked at, either the SSMPs that are associated with those places.
I'm certainly aware of the SSMPs, but I'm not sure we've looked at or tried to scrape the data that you're referring to for this purpose. So thank you for that. Any other questions or comments on spatial data, location, mapping? Otherwise, again, we do welcome input and advice. and we can discuss this in office hours, we are having to plow ahead and do the matching and attribution that we can over the next few months. So we also welcome, ideas that we can't operationalize here, but might be operationalized in future work. I'm not seeing or hearing any other comments. So I think I'm going to go ahead and run through the last few slides, and then we have again an opportunity for Q&A discussion just generally at the very end, if anything else comes up. But our final few slides are just kind of to close us out, remind you of future meetings. Again, here's just the meeting schedule for the advisor group over, well, really the life of the project. So our next meeting will be at the end of April, or April 24th, I should say. And then we'll have meetings in July and October. And then 2 more meetings officially at this point in 2027. But that's a lot to take in. So I want to just underline that what we anticipate being able to present and discuss and share more in summaries beforehand is the results of the inadequacy analysis itself, subject to the timelines and reviews that Grace started or presented up front near the start of the meeting. Certainly risk analysis updates and refinements, including related to spatial mapping and location that underpins some of those results. And then again, we'll feature the results of the unsewered area modeling that UMass has been leading the charge on as part of this effort, and we've presented on previously. And then we'll close likely with a preview of the solutions and cost analyses that the Office of Water Programs, Sacramento State University, has been working on throughout, and you'll hear a lot more about in meetings after April, but they'll be able to give you kind of a preview of what that's going to look like as a lead-in to really churning through a lot of those exciting results that you've previously seen only sort of the methodologies for. So that is the plan for April. But as a reminder, there are opportunities already scheduled for office hours in February and March before April. And then here's the list for, I guess, the first 6 years of 2026. And otherwise, you are welcome, as always, to contact us with questions and comments in the interim. But office hours are a great time to dive into more details if you have or dive into more detailed questions and discussion if you have them on any of this in particular. I think, yeah, that's all we have. So we have 23 minutes for any other questions or comments related to anything we presented today or didn't present today, but you have questions on. But if folks don't have those questions or comments, we can also end early. But really appreciate everyone's time and input and helping, make this effort what it is. I'm not yet hearing any questions, comments. Again, it's lunchtime on a Friday, but we'll wait just one more minute. Also want to see, Danya, do you want to say anything in closing or add anything?
No, I just wanted to say thank you very much to everyone. We appreciate your time and all your valuable input. Everything is being considered. So thanks for staying with us on a Friday. Thank you.
All right. Well, yeah. thanks to everyone. Not hearing any questions or comments, so I think we're gonna go ahead and close the meeting, and we will be in touch. So cheers, happy Friday, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.